Welcome to the Technical Writing Success Podcast from Curt Robbins, where we help you get smarter than your competition. This is episode 186. And we have a really great topic queued up for you. This episode reviews an informative article from this show's producer, information architect Curt Robbins, entitled White Papers, What Every Tech Writer Should Know, that was published on LinkedIn.
Which is, it's such a crucial topic. We're talking about those massive, potentially hundreds of pages long projects that we all face.
Oh yeah, the ones that can just completely overwhelm even the most seasoned technical writers. So our mission today is really about demystifying these beasts.
Exactly. We'll be exploring the essential components that make these documents successful and sharing some best practices so you can tackle them without, completely losing your sanity.
Which is always the goal, right? Because for any of you working in corporate IT departments or think tanks or major tech companies, these documents are just a constant reality.
They really are.
They're the primary vehicle for capturing what we call tribal knowledge. You have all these brilliant engineers and developers, and they have these highly technical details just floating around in their heads.
And it's our job to extract all that and package it for an external audience.
Right, and that packaging, it's usually aimed at educating and persuading readers about a very specific topic.
Often an emerging or disruptive technology. So whether the subject matter is space exploration, cybersecurity, electric cars, genetics.
The white paper bridges the gap between those innovators and the broader public or the marketplace.
It does. The challenge, however, is that the scope of that packaging varies wildly depending on the subject.
Yeah, Curt's article actually brought up two wildly contrasting examples that I think perfectly show how much scope dictates our daily life as writers.
Oh, the wellness supplement versus the lab data.
Exactly. So the first was a massive, highly expensive project promoting a wellness supplement ingredient.
Just writing that paper required vast amounts of research.
And grueling rounds of interviews with subject matter experts, which we all know how that goes.
Managing subject matter experts is a project management feat all on its own. As writers, we definitely know the pain of trying to pin down a dozen busy executives or lead developers for just a 30-minute meeting.
It's like herding cats.
It really is. You're extracting coherent data and then trying to align their completely disparate viewpoints. It can easily consume months of a project's timeline.
Oh, for sure. But then compare that to the second example from the article, which was a straightforward paper summarizing laboratory testing on terpenes.
Right. Those are aroma and flavor chemicals.
And I'd imagine synthesizing that lab data is a completely different experience. You aren't chasing down engineers for quotes.
No, not at all. You have concrete metrics and structured data to work with from day one.
Which is amazing.
Clean inputs change everything. The lab data was already concisely and professionally documented. When you have those clean inputs and a predefined scope, the trajectory of the project is infinitely smoother.
You aren't starting from scratch.
Exactly. You're taking well-organized data and structuring it for a specific audience. Having a predefined scope is a luxury you won't always have, but when you do, it completely shifts the workload.
Having clean inputs is definitely the dream scenario. But what happens when you finally have your scope locked in and you need to actually build the document? We're going to break down the non-negotiable anatomy of a white paper right after this. Let's take a brief break for a special message from our producer, Curt Robbins.
Hi, this is Curt Robbins. First, thanks for listening. I truly appreciate your support. I want to let you know that I'm currently accepting new clients. My rates are affordable, and I have more than 25 years of experience working for enterprise companies like Microsoft, Northrop Grumman, Oracle, PNC Bank, FedEx, USAA, and Wells Fargo, among many others. If you want to improve your IT documentation and communications, hire me. I deliver fast, know how to use AI to improve efficiency and accuracy, and love going the extra mile to satisfy my clients. Thank you for subscribing and listening. Back to you, Daphne and Fred.
Welcome back to the Technical Writing Success Podcast, where we help you get smarter than your competition.
All right, let's jump straight into the actual structure of these documents. The source article outlines specific, non-negotiable elements every white paper must have.
Right, and skipping any of these means you're taking a massive risk with the reader's experience. You better have a very good reason for doing so.
So let's start at the very beginning.
We have to start with the table of contents.
Which I know, as tech writers, we obviously know what a TOC is. It sounds almost too basic to mention.
But it's surprising how often they are treated as an afterthought in the drafting process.
Totally. It's not just about listing page numbers. If you've got a 100-page document, the TOC needs to be optimized for navigation.
Especially if the reader is viewing an interactive PDS or a mobile-first format. It literally sets the user experience for the entire reading journey.
Exactly. You have to respect the reader's time by letting them navigate intuitively.
And that flows directly into the executive summary, which is arguably the most important section of the entire document.
Oh, without a doubt.
We all know that a significant percentage of stakeholders, particularly the C-suite, will only ever read this specific section.
Yeah, they are going to skim that one page, look for the bottom line, and make a budget decision right then and there.
Curt's article points out that if the executive summary doesn't cleanly encapsulate the problem, the proposed solution, and most importantly, the benefits,
then the rest of your hard work is basically invisible.
especially if the white paper is being used as a marketing asset, those benefits must be the absolute core focus.
Because if you hook them with the summary, you lead them right into the introduction.
Right, which is where you establish the background information and set the tone. It acts as a persuasive narrative that validates the author or the source of the information.
It's essentially recruiting allies to read further.
I love that way of framing it.
You want the reader to have zero ambiguity about the journey they are about to take if they choose to jump into the detailed, long-form content.
And that journey usually happens in the body of the paper. This is where the vast majority of the volume lives.
The granular details, the metrics, the core arguments.
But how you present that volume matters immensely. It requires immaculate formatting. A technical audience might want the raw data, but absolutely no one wants to read an intimidating wall of text.
No one.
You have to provide text relief.
How do you balance that, though? If you're writing a highly technical piece, how do you prevent it from looking like a solid block of 1,000-word paragraphs without accidentally stripping out the necessary data?
You achieve text relief through generous white space, relevant images, schematics, clear visual hierarchies, and process flows.
So you break it up digitally.
Exactly. Those graphical elements give the reader's eyes a break, reduce cognitive load, and help them process dense material much more effectively than text alone.
That makes the document actually breathable.
It does.
And after walking them through all that dense material, you finally hit the conclusion. The psychology here is fascinating to me. The conclusion obviously summarizes the key findings, but it's primarily about psychological reinforcement.
Right, because you define a small number of main goals at the very beginning of the project.
Yes.
Those goals dictate the introduction, and they must be echoed in the conclusion. A tree is a closed loop of logic.
If you aren't echoing your introduction at the end, the narrative just feels unresolved.
And the reader is left hanging.
Which is the last thing you want. Now, beyond those core essentials, the article also mentions optional appendices like indexes, glossaries, things like that.
Which can be useful.
But I know back in the print days, there was a real temptation to just pad these documents out to make them look impressive sitting on a desk. Is that still a trap writers fall into today?
Oh, absolutely. The heft factor is a very real trap, and it's something you need to strictly avoid.
Adding junk filler merely to make the document feel physically thicker.
Or more important, it just inflates the page count and wastes the reader's time. If a glossary genuinely helps a specific audience segment understand the terminology, absolutely include it. But if it's just padding, cut it.
That makes perfect sense. Let's pivot slightly to the execution side of things. We have the structure down, but writing the actual content requires strict adherence to some core best practices.
Starting with tone. The article stresses the need for absolute sincerity and neutrality to build trust.
The quickest way to lose a technical reader's faith is to sound overly promotional.
You have to convince the audience that your document features absolute integrity, facts, and transparency. It cannot read like a cheap sales pitch.
It's an educational report, not a brochure. Though I always find maintaining that objectivity can be really tough when you've been buried in a project for months, actively advocating for a specific solution.
Which is why the required objectivity has to extend to the editing process as well. The most effective strategy is bringing in a fresh editor.
Someone outside the bubble.
Yes. You need a professional who has zero emotional ownership of the project and no established perceptions that might limit their feedback. Authors simply get too close to their own work.
An unbiased editor can spot the structural inconsistencies that we just become completely blind to over time.
Exactly.
Another crucial step, probably before you even write a single word, is profiling your audience.
Tailoring the tone depends entirely on who is reading. Are you writing for software engineers who want raw data?
Or are you writing for executives who hold the budget and need to understand the high-level return on investment?
You have to determine their technical literacy and their relationship to the company early on. But regardless of who that audience is, evidence is everything. Claims must be meticulously backed up.
Integrating peer-reviewed research studies, expert opinions, successful case studies from academia or the marketplace, user testimonials.
The entire credibility of the document rests on the strength of that supporting evidence.
And as you compile all that evidence, you have to remember the ultimate rule of technical writing. Terse beats verbose.
Less is always more.
Even in a massive document, you want to avoid jargon, keep the language clear, and only provide as much depth as is strictly necessary to achieve the project's goals.
Those principles perfectly align with what the author refers to as the 8 pillars of technical writing. Gaining the allegiance and faith of shareholders, the marketplace, or government regulators doesn't happen by accident.
No, it doesn't.
It requires clarity, precision, and immense respect for the reader's time through meticulous documentation.
It's definitely a monumental task to get all these elements perfectly aligned.
It is. And it raises an important question for you to ponder as you approach your next documentation project.
I'm all ears.
We are living in an era where attention spans are rapidly shrinking, and the way we consume information is changing by the second. How can technical writers continue to adapt the traditional long-form white paper format without losing the incredible depth required to win the allegiance of shareholders and government regulators?
Thank you for listening to the Technical Writing Success Podcast from Curt Robbins, where we help you get smarter than your competition. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share. We'll see you next time.